people are told, don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't get so lost in your local environment and your local considerations that you don't see the big picture and see where things are connected to one another, where they're going. And that's true. There's a very big danger in not seeing the big picture. But there's also an equal danger in being so attracted to the big picture, so interested in the forest as a whole, that you miss the individual trees. So there has to be a kind of combination of both. William James, one of the great American philosophers, wrote about this. And I think there's an incident in last week's Parsha which has all sorts of major themes and implications, but there's a little detail in it that could be missed, and it too has something important to teach us. The incident is where Miriam and Aaron speak against Moses. Miriam initiated it, that's why her name is first. And they in particular criticized the way he was handling his married life. Now, I don't want to go into the details of that. If you push me, I will, but that's not the point that I'm looking for. They criticized him, they made a tragic mistake. HaKadosh Baruch Hu responded to them by defining the difference between Moses and all other prophets, which becomes an axiom for all later thinking, that Moses is special in various ways, and no later or earlier prophets, that includes the Messiah, can match Moses. And Miriam and Aaron are punished for what they did. Aaron momentarily contracts what's called in Hebrew tsaras, which we often render as leprosy, though it's not exactly medically the same, and it disappears. And Miriam contracts tsaras in such a way that she would normally be isolated for having contracted tsaras. Now, some of the conditions aren't met, and there's no one there to see her, and seeing as a relative. I'm not going into that detail now. But the punishment is that she's going to be excluded from the camp for a week. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself tells Moses that that's what has to happen. She's going to be excluded from the camp for a week. Now, while she's out, the Torah tells us that the people didn't travel. You know that they traveled. In the end, they ended up traveling for 40 years. They traveled to many destinations. During that week, they didn't travel. Now, you think, practically speaking, it's quite difficult if you're going to go on a trek through the wilderness to be all alone, isolated, outside the group. But no, she got that favor that during that week, they didn't travel. Now, if you look more carefully at the surrounding texts, you ask yourself, what do you mean they didn't travel? Were they setting their own route? Were they deciding when they felt like it to travel and when they didn't feel like it not to travel? But the text is absolutely clear in great detail that the only trigger for traveling was when the pillar of cloud in the day or fire in the night lifted itself up off the tabernacle, and that was a signal that they should travel. And if it remained on the tabernacle, that they shouldn't travel. They weren't making up their own travel plans on their own. So it means that the people didn't travel because God didn't decree that there should be a passage at that time. So the first question is, why is it stated that the people didn't travel if really it's not up to them? It's up just as following instructions from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the oral tradition explains what the motivation for this kindness that she received, that the people didn't travel while she was excluded, the motivation was because of something where she too acted in a very significant way by staying in a place and putting herself in some danger to accomplish something. And that was when Moses was born. Miriam was Moses' older sister. as Aaron was his older brother. And the text tells us that Moses' mother was able to hide him for 3 months, and after 3 months she couldn't hide him anymore, and that was the time of the decree of the Egyptians to drown all the newborn males, because they had like a magical inspiration that the savior of the Jewish people was going to be born at that time, and they were right. So they were drowning all the males, because they, of course, wouldn't have dreamt that the savior would be female. No, that's ancient Egypt for you. And there were special conditions. Moses' mother gave birth early, and they were keeping track of pregnancies, and they were coming when the birth was likely to come, and she was able to hide him for 3 months, but after that, they were going to come and investigate, and he would be discovered and killed. So she made a basket for him, you may know the story, and put him in the basket, and put him by the bank of the river, and left him there. What else could she do? But Miriam, Moses' sister, followed, and she stayed behind. She stayed behind to watch and see what would happen to Moses. Well, what did happen is, famously, the daughter of Pharaoh came to the river to bathe, and she saw the basket, and she sent one of her servants to investigate, and she found that there was a baby in the basket, and she took pity on the baby. She herself figured out it's probably a Jewish baby, because the babies would be put in the basket on the edge of the river if he wasn't in danger. And then Miriam, observing this, comes forward and says, "Would you like me to find a wet nurse for the baby?" The daughter of Pharaoh hadn't given birth. She hasn't milk to give. And the daughter of Pharaoh says, yes. So, of course, Miriam goes to her mother, who's Moses' mother, and arranges that the baby should be given back to his mother until he's finished nursing. That's what she accomplished by waiting there by the river, by the basket, to see what would happen, to see how she could help. So, the oral tradition tells us, this is how God, so to speak, paid her back for that. Here, she's in trouble, and if they had traveled, it would have been a terrible burden for her. No. Kodesh Baruch Hu decreed they shouldn't travel so that she shouldn't suffer that extra burden. That's what the oral tradition says. Now, let's figure out the time period. From the time of Moses' birth to the time of the Exodus, how many years pass? 80 years. 80 years. And then there's extra time until this incident where Miriam spoke against her brother Moses to Aaron. So it's more than 80 years later. Couldn't we ask, if she did well by waiting by the basket, and she's owed, so to speak, because Baruch Hu resolves that he's going to compensate her for that, couldn't there have been some time in the intervening 80 years to compensate her? Doesn't it sound like this period, this particular incident was chosen to be the time when she would be compensated? And if so, why would that be? What is there in these circumstances that makes it special to compensate her when she's being excluded from the camp as a punishment for having spoken against Moses? Well, Moshe Feinstein, one of the greatest Torah scholars of the 20th century, who came from Russia but lived in New York, gave a very interesting explanation. I'm going to put it in modern terms, more modern terms, because I'll communicate the idea better that way. When you'll become parents, God willing, and you'll have children, and you may look up what suggestions there are for dealing with children. One widespread suggestion, and I think not all of them are good, but this one I think is very good. When the child does something wrong, make sure that you punish the action, but not the person. Make sure it's clear that when you punish the action, You're not discarding the person. You're not cutting off your care and relationship with the person. Make sure the person doesn't feel I'm bad. What the person should feel is I've done something bad. Okay, how do you do that? How do you make it clear to the child who's done something wrong and needs to be punished that you're directing the punishment only at the action and not at the person? Well, here's a radical idea. When the punishment is taking place, simultaneously reward the child for something he's done well. So, I'll give you an example. The child has struck his younger brother. Yeah, it's a boy. And the parent says, you cannot be together with other people if you're going to behave violently. We can't have that. So I'm sending you to your room. Well, that hurts the child. The child wants to be the other children. He wants to be with everybody else. So it definitely hurts. Now, imagine the father takes the child up to his room and says, listen, you're going to spend the next hour in your room. But here's a book you might enjoy. Here's a book you might enjoy. What's going on in the mind of the child? But I'm bad. I'm bad. My father's punishing me. Why is he giving me the book? And if you do this consistently, he'll figure out it's because I'm not bad. I did something bad. But because I'm not bad, my father cares how I'll feel. He cares that I should be happy, even though I'm going to be punished by not being downstairs with everybody else. So this is what Kadosh Baruch Hu did for Miriam. He did it not only for her personally, but more than that, I think, to teach it as a lesson. Now, in fact, the punishment is phrased this way. This is what Kadosh Baruch Hu says. What should happen to Miriam? Well, look, imagine you had an interaction between parent and child, and suppose the child disgraced the parent. Wouldn't the consequence be a period of isolation, a period of semi-exile? It would be. That's where a child disgraces a parent. Here, Miriam disgraced me, her creator. So certainly, there should be a period of isolation. And God's presence dwells with the whole nation, with the people of Israel, in a way that it doesn't dwell and manifest itself anywhere else. So when she's excluded from the camp, she's cut off from that particular expression of God's presence. So there is a distancing between her and God. That's pretty drastic. At the very same time, God says, I want Miriam to be rewarded for what she did 80 years ago. And that will show her, now I'm not rejecting her. I'm punishing the action that she performed, but I'm not rejecting her. I still believe in her. I still want something for her benefit. And that's how this principle is being expressed here. Are we together? This happens not only with parents and children, this happens with interactions with other people. You have to think, when someone does something that you have to criticize, either objectively criticize or, what's often much stronger, simply say to the person, you know what you did hurt me. It hurt me. But you don't want him to feel it as an accusation and as a disconnect. So you may imagine excuses. You may have been under pressure. You probably didn't realize how I would take this. You didn't realize that it would hurt me. That way you're saying, I don't hold you to be guilty. I don't hold you to be a criminal. But I do want you to know that it hurt me. So because I believe you care about me in the future, you'll be careful not to do this. To try to send the negative message together with something that's reinforcing and something that's connecting. That's the element here in this incident with Miriam. Now, I did ask also, why does it say the people didn't travel? So I think that there are two things going on here. First of all, the problem is the people traveling and her being disconnected from the people while they're traveling. That's the problem. If it had said that Anan, the cloud didn't go off the tabernacle, say, okay, she's out, the cloud didn't go off the tabernacle. But so what? Here's telling you what the consequence is that's of importance to her. Trekking through the wilderness in isolation is even if you're within sighted distance of the group, but still you're exposed to the wilderness in a way that they aren't. And then I think that it's the idea here that the Jewish people carry that presence. And that's why when God says, I'm disconnecting from her temporarily as a sign of displeasure for action, that disconnect is acted out by her being extruded from the people. So this is just an example of how, when you look at the way in which the Torah is set up, that try not to miss the trees for the forest as much as not missing the forest for the trees. Okay, we're together? Now, I want to introduce to you some moral ideas which ultimately have an important application to the way Torah is lived. But let's see if we can get a couple of important moral ideas across today, and then we'll try to make the applications in the future. Let's start with lying. I think everybody agrees that ordinarily lying is wrong. Lying is something that should be discouraged. Why is lying wrong? What makes it wrong? What's bad about lying? Yeah.
It's like you're stealing somebody's right to the truth.
Okay, you're stealing somebody's right to the truth. Okay. Okay, you're violating his right to the truth. Yeah.
I would say there isn't necessarily a right that people have towards truth. Let's say lying, by telling things are false, by definition, it's wrong. Because it's things that are not true. Why should someone need to lie or have to lie?
Okay, so you're saying that in and of itself it's wrong. In other words, I don't have to go anywhere else to explain why it's wrong.
It's just, if it's wrong, it's wrong. And I think if it's not the truth, it's wrong.
Okay, let me ask this question. What usually is the purpose of lying? What does the person who lies want to accomplish?
Please someone or
Say-
hide something.
Say again?
Please someone.
Lead someone?
Please, like to appeal to someone, like to present.
Oh, I see. Please someone. Well, how is he going to please him?
Like I tell you what you want to hear.
Okay. What's the effect of telling me what I want to hear? The first what happens right away?
You're gonna be happy. I'm gonna be happy.
I'll be happy only if what?
If you hear what you want to hear.
You need another word. It's not just hearing. That's not the eardrums vibrating. Yeah, you have to believe it. In order to get that benefit, I have to believe it. The root purpose of lying is to get somebody to believe something. Imagine you knew that he wouldn't believe it even if you said so. Would you lie? What would be the purpose? So now, that means that the purpose of lying is to get someone to believe something false. Let me ask you, is that always wrong? To get someone to believe something false? Is that always wrong? Could there be times when it's right to get someone to believe something false?
Yes.
Let me give you a brutal example. Immanuel Kant made this, but I would believe it's a mistake. He wrote, it's always wrong to lie. Always. Okay, here's a scenario. I have a frantic knock on my door. I open it up, and George is standing there. Help! Fred is going to kill me! He runs and he hides himself in my closet and closes the door. 30 seconds later, George comes by with the gun in his hand. Where's Fred? Sir Immanuel Kant, what am I supposed to do now? Oh, don't ever tell a lie. No. You have to tell the truth. See, he's over there in the closet. Thanks a lot. Bang! He's dead. Did I do the right thing? I'm not sure, really. Did I do the right thing by telling the truth? Wouldn't it have been better to say, he ran around the corner, hurry quickly and catch him, slam the door and call the police. No, wouldn't that be better? To tell him something false? Is it always right to tell the truth? Is it always wrong to lie? Let's suppose there's a gun and someone's playing with the gun. I happen to know that it's against the law and the detectives are on their way. But he won't believe me if I tell him that. I say to him, you think the gun is empty, it's loaded, and it's about to explode, you better get rid of it. Well, if he tosses it in the corner and runs out of the house, he'll avoid the detectives. That'll be good for him. If he believes me, even though it's not true, sometimes. So then the question will be, is there really a right to the truth? Or is it that when you tell somebody something false and you get him to believe it, you're usually going to disadvantage him? When is the bus coming? In exactly 5 minutes, because I don't want him to move for 5 minutes. It's really coming in a half hour. But I don't want him to move for 5 minutes. If I tell him a half hour, he's going to go, because I need him to stand there. Oh, that's not good, because when he stands there, he's going to miss his appointment, and I'm going to take the appointment, I'm going to get the job. So that's going to hurt him. Usually, when you tell somebody something false, it hurts him. He loses out on something. So maybe what's wrong with lying is that it causes the person damage. And when it doesn't cause him damage, it won't be wrong. And sometimes it actually benefit him, in which case it'll be right. Are we together so far? So here's a pattern of thinking. We have things we think are right, things we think are wrong, and sometimes we say, like you said, look, it's just wrong. You can see that it's wrong. Or you say there's a right to something, his rights being violated. Maybe what's really going on is you're hurting somebody, you're doing something that's bad for him, you're making his life worse in some way. And if you weren't, or you're making it better in some way, then that would make it right and good. There are people who think that's all there is to ethics. Just making the world better or worse. That's all there is. It's called utilitarianism. Utility has to be defined, but it means making the world a better place. And what you should do is act in such a way as to make the world a better place and not make the world a worse place. The question is whether, like in lying, when you get into it, when you push it, you could see that there's an effect on making the world better or making the world worse, whether that will work across the board. So anything that we think that is really right and wrong in and of itself, just and unjust in and of itself, maybe if we push it, we'll see that really it's a question of how the consequences work out. That would be very great simplifying matter. Then all of your ethical thinking, all of your moral thinking would just be a question of making the world better or worse. There are problems there also, but it makes it much simpler than it otherwise would be. But there's serious problems with that idea. And I want to introduce you to the problems by asking you about the trolley examples. Are you familiar with the trolley examples? Most of you seem not to be. So let me rehearse it and see what we can learn from that. This is about 50 years old. I think Philippa Foot was the one who introduced it, and it's been a big philosophical, and it's very important for AI in self-driving cars, as you'll see. Imagine a trolley going down a track, and a mile down the track, there are 5 people strapped to the tracks.
Yeah.
And if the trolley keeps going, it's going to kill all 5. And suddenly the driver finds out about this, and he slams on the brakes, but the brakes don't work. The brakes are gone. 5 people are going to die. But there's a side track 100 yards before the people. If he goes off on the side track, he won't hit them. Their lives will be saved. There's only one little problem, and that is, on the side track, there's one person tied to the tracks. So, if the lever is pushed to push him onto the side track, that one person is going to die. who now, if nothing is done, isn't going to die. What to do?
Don't touch it.
Can't hear you.
Don't touch it.
Don't touch and kill 5.
Yes.
So just ignore the fact that in one way 5 people die, and the other way 1 person dies.
Yes.
It's not your fault that 5 people died, but if 1 person dies, it's going to be your fault.
Right? It won't be your fault, but then we don't only judge people morally by virtue and vice versa, or fault for what they do, we also judge them for what they don't do. Let's imagine that a child is pushed, an 18-month-old child is pushed into a pool, and I'm the only person standing there, and if I don't take the child out, he's going to die. And I can take him out by just putting my hand, grabbing his shirt, and pulling him out. And I don't do it. Won't that be my, 1 second, slowly. Won't that be my fault that he died?
Yeah.
And it's my fault because I didn't save him. So we don't only fault people for what they cause and make happen, we also fault people for what they don't avoid, don't stop. So the fact that I sat there with my hands folded, I didn't do anything, doesn't mean I'm innocent, because sometimes I should have done something. So yes, if he keeps his hands there, it's not his fault that they died. He didn't set it up, he didn't cause it, but it might be his fault that he didn't save them, which is another way of saying it would be his fault that they died, because he didn't save them.
What makes the 5 worth more than the 1?
5 people.
You tell me. I mean, do people count for anything? If people count for something, then on the average, 5 people count for more than 1.
It was meant to be that the 5 were supposed to die, so the 5 were supposed to die.
That's another thing, right? Meant to be, that invokes something like God and something like divine providence and so on and so on. For the time being, I hear that, but for the time being, let's leave that out. Let's leave it just on the basis of what you would think your moral responsibility would be. Who else wanted? Somebody else's hand was it? Yeah.
I think it gets more complicated to, let's say I adapt the model of, you know what, 5 people are more important than 1 person because it's 5 versus 1. But let's say that 1 person is someone you know, or let's say it's a family member, or let's say it's, you know, a brother versus 30 people. You know, it's one of your own siblings versus 30, or how is someone supposed to make that decision? And there's also the factor as well. And I was talking with, you know, one of my American friends back in America about the war. He's not Jewish, and you know, he called the hostage rescue mission. He said that's like the trolley problem, where you have, if you keep the train on the track, you allow your hostages to die, or you can shift the other track and kill, you know, 200 Palestinians. And you know, obviously the nuances of like, okay, those people were holding them hostage, and those are the people who are not necessarily innocent in the process. But so I didn't think it necessarily a fair comparison to make with terms of this trolley problem. But it's something that I think it gets a lot more complicated than just like, okay, is it 1 versus 5 in terms of like who is this 1 person? Who are these 5 people? And what conditions like have led them all to be there?
I agree with you. I agree with everything you said. And it's interesting that your friend brought up the trolley problem in that context. And I think that the way you have to attack problems like this is try to simplify them and see if you can get an answer to the simple case, and then add the complications one by one and see how that changes the answer. Otherwise, if you start with all the complications at the beginning, you're fighting several battles at once. It's too difficult philosophically. That's why in philosophy, what they do is they create simple, pure cases, but they cut out. And by the way, science is exactly the same. What you do in a laboratory is to make sure only one thing's going on, and you shield the laboratory from everything else so it won't interfere, so you'll get an answer for how this one thing works. So much so that Nancy Cartwright, who's a philosopher of science, and for those who are prejudiced, somewhat rightly, she's only a philosopher, she has a PhD in physics. And she does research work in physics in addition to being a philosopher. She calls a laboratory a nomological machine. In laboratories, you make laws. You don't discover them, you make them. You make them because you shield everything from everything else. But then to say that that's what's going on in the street, you didn't test that. Okay, the street's too complicated to test, so then you didn't test it. So don't generalize to the street. Okay, so now I think let's go back where either these we don't know, or even let's say you do know. You're traveling in China and you don't know any of these people, and they're certainly not relatives, and you have no clue what their culture is and what their ideas are and their talents are. But 5 against 1, on the whole, it would be very unusual to say that the one was so outstanding that he was worth more than five human beings. So if you're talking about the outcome that does the best for the world, it seems obvious that you should push the train onto the other track. Now, against that, the thought was, but he wasn't going to die, and you're making him die. Why do you justify changing the world in such a way that he has to die? There is an answer to this, and we haven't gotten yet to the difficult question. Difficult question is another case, but yeah, you know.
We're distinguishing between saving and killing, and saving like with the price of human life. So it's definitely
Okay. Okay, let's. He said it correctly. Let's look at it this way. The trolley's bearing down on 5. There's a side track. Suppose there's no one on the side track. Then for sure you would divert it to the side track, right? There's no question. Why? Because by diverting it to the side track, you're saving the 5. The action you're doing is an action of saving the 5. Okay? Now, when there is someone on the side track, that doesn't change your action. Your action is saving the 5. That's what you're doing. It has a cost. Now it has a cost. But that doesn't change it into murder. What you're doing is saving 5 and has a cost of 1. Then you have to ask, when I'm saving 5 with the cost of losing 1, what is the best outcome? The best outcome, people say, is saving 1, having 5 survive rather than having 1 survive. The real trick comes when you contrast this with another case. The child is bearing down on the 5, and if nothing happens, they're going to die, and there's a bridge over the tracks. Charlie hasn't come to the bridge yet. Now you're standing there on the bridge, and in front of you is a big, fat guy, really big, and really fat. 7'3", 450 pounds, and you're strong enough to push him off the bridge onto the track. And if you do that, Charlie will smash into him, kill him, and stop. And the 5 will be saved. Now here's the question. Do you feel the same way about pushing him off the bridge to stop the trolley as you feel about diverting the trolley to a different track, or do you feel differently about it? Differently. It's not easy to describe why it's different, but I suppose you feel a little more uneasy about pushing the guy off the bridge. Here, this is the point of the problems, and surveys have been done with tens of thousands of people. Most people tend to take the following attitude, that when I push him off the bridge, I'm killing him to stop the trolley. I'm performing an act of murder to stop the trolley. Yes, to save 5 people. That's true. That's true. The outcome is I'm saving 5 people. But I'm committing an act of murder to stop it. Whereas when I move into the trolley onto the side track, I'm performing an act of saving. I'm saving the 5. I'm doing exactly the same thing as I would do if the track were empty. I'm saving them. But I'm saving them. So then the outcome is that someone's going to die. The two aren't equivalent because of the action that I'm performing. Now, the important effect of this reasoning is that in both cases it's 5 and 1. In both cases it's 5 and 1. So the outcome is exactly the same. The outcome of turning onto the other track is 5 are saved and 1 dies. The outcome of pushing the fat fellow off the track, off the bridge, is that 1 dies and 5 are saved. If you think that these cases are different, it means your mind isn't only thinking about how will the world be a better place. Your mind has other things that it's thinking about. That's a very important fact. It means you're not only looking like a utilitarian at the best outcome, because see, the two outcomes are the same, as far as you could tell. And yet you feel one is appropriate and the other is inappropriate. Let me follow this up with a simpler dramatic case, but I mean, this is where the whole discussion is. Let's suppose you have 5 people who are dying of diseases, and they need transplants. And there's only one person, and he has 5 different organs, and they're all perfect matches for the people who are sick. If they take his 5 organs, they'll save the 5 who are sick. Of course, he'll die. Take out those 5 organs, he's dead. But it's 1 against 5. Do you kill the healthy person in order to get his 5 organs to save the 5 people? Most people say no. You can't commit murder to get a better outcome. That you can't do. You can work to get a better outcome, which might, as a side effect, have the effect of someone dying, but you can't commit murder to get a better outcome, which means you don't only care about the outcome. You care also about the action that you perform and its own moral status. Like you said, by definition, it's wrong. Like you said, you have a right. Those are the words that come from this side of the tracks. Yeah, but he doesn't have to be sacrificed to save the 5. I don't have the right to kill him to save the 5. On the other hand, I do have a responsibility to save the 5, and if as a consequence he dies, I didn't kill him to save the 5. I did exactly what I would have done if the track were empty. I just saved them, that's all. It just happens to have as a consequence that he's going to die. Kant puts it, another part of Kant puts it this way: you can't use a human being purely as a means. That's forbidden. You don't recognize what the stature of a human being is if you say, I'll kill him to save them. You can't do that. So now we end up with what I think is the only sensible system, and that is to use both. Yeah, we care about the outcome, we care about values, we care about utility, we care about making the world a better place. We definitely do care about that. But we also care about the rightness or wrongness of your action, independently of the outcome, even when you sacrifice. You sacrifice some of the outcome. Here's another example where this kind of reasoning applies. There are people who ask, why should I vote? In no way will my one vote change anything in the outcome. It won't determine who will win or lose, because if it's a one vote difference, they'll do another make-up election. Because they know the counting is inaccurate. The counting is off by hundreds, for sure. So if the numbers you get mean that he wins by 1 vote, they'll do a new election. Can't happen. And even if, well, how many white males of blue eyes voted for this one, voted for that one? There are thousands, and my 1 vote isn't going to make any difference. So if my vote doesn't make any difference, why should I vote? And similarly, why should I pay the bus fare? The budget of the buses in the city is $14.5 million a year. My $150 per year isn't going to make any difference to the projects and the developments and the priorities of a $14.5 million budget. It's not going to make any difference at all. So why should I pay my bus fare? Yeah.
Because if everyone said that, nothing would happen at all. There'd be no elections, there'd be no transit.
Okay, let's try that. This is a very common answer. Let's see if this works. Wow, if everybody said that, then it would be a disaster. The first thing to think about is, but we know very well that's not going to happen, that everyone's going to say that. We know that. Now, if I'm the editor of a newspaper and I'm publishing op-eds and I'm trying to convince people not to vote, that's something else. But I'm just one person making voting, and voting has a long history, and never has it happened that everybody said that. Never has it happened that 60% of the people have said that. So why should I worry about something that I know is not going to happen, if it would happen? Number one. And number two, if everybody said it, and I was the only one voting, it wouldn't help. The system would crash anyway. Right? I can't make the difference between only 10% people showing up and the system crashing, and then I vote and it's 10% plus 1, so it won't crash. I can't make any difference to stop it from crashing either. So why is the idea that if everyone said that, yeah. And then, as one wag put it, if everybody decided to turn on his water at exactly 9 a.m., the water mains would break. Does that mean I shouldn't turn them on at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. or 7 a.m.? Because if everybody said that, then everything would break. That's probably not a right outcome either. So the what if everybody did that argument is not really a very good argument. Yeah.
The actions of the individuals affect communities. So if one starts doing that, like it might affect the entire community.
Okay. You already changed what you said. You said it affects, and you said might affect. Because you realized, yeah, but, maybe yes, maybe no. Not guaranteed, right? So just for the sake of the argument, for the sake of the judgment, put in that it's not going to affect anybody. I think that's very realistic. After all, usually a very large minority don't vote. That's the fact that they don't vote. And yet the system doesn't crash. So it's never crashed in any democratic country. So it's not like it's going to lead to that. Well, this whole question arises because you're thinking of the consequences. Will it still be stable? Won't it be stable? Can I prevent it? Will other people follow me? You're thinking of how will the outcome be affected by what I do? The argument is that the outcome won't be affected. Won't make any difference at all. And if there's no difference at all, then there's no reason for me to do it. That's the one-dimensional thought. Only the outcome matters. Only the better or worse result matters. And if what you do has no effect on it, then it can't matter. But we saw already that that's too limited. That's too simple. In the trolley case, the outcome is the same and the difference matters. Makes a difference whether you turn to the side track or you push the guy off the bridge. So how about asking this question? Is it fair for the individual to benefit from the results of the joint effort without paying his share? The buses are run and they're paid for by the taxes of the entire community. He's riding the bus. He's getting from place A to place B. Is it fair that he should get from place A to place B without paying his fair share of the costs for the benefit to be available? Here's the question of whether his $150 will make a difference in the $15.5 million budget. Is not the right question. The question is what he's doing right in and of itself, let alone whether it'll change the outcome. That's a very important question. I think, in the philosophy that I've read about the subject, that's the only answer that I know of. That's an answer that can be sustained. Same with voting. If you believe that democracy gives you benefits above and beyond other forms of government, then it's voting which sustains it. And since you're benefiting from it, you should pay your fair share by taking part in the vote, so as to not be getting an unfair free ride on somebody else's efforts. And the same is with the bus system, and the same is with any of the joint actions that people perform. And this works for good and for bad as well. Consider a case like this. 20 people pick up a 200-pound boulder, and they drop it on Philip's stereo, smashing it to smithereens. And they catch a couple of the guys and say, you smashed his stereo. And one guy says, listen, 200-pound boulder for 20 guys, what did I say, 10 guys or 20 guys? 20 guys, is 10 pounds apiece. Suppose I hadn't been there. It would have been easy for 20 guys, 19 guys, to pick up 200 pounds. They didn't need me. I wasn't necessary. Had I not been there, it would have been exactly the same. So I didn't really do anything. Now you have, what if everybody would say that? If that's a good defense for him, it's a good defense for everyone. If it's a good defense for everyone, then no one should be penalized. That's not the right outcome. Here we're talking about responsibility for an action. They all performed it, they all have to pay for the consequences. In American law, I'm not sure whether this is federal law or state law, but in many places, if there's a bank holdup, bank robbery, and let's say someone was shot and injured in the robbery, the guy who's sitting in the car outside, the getaway car, is just as liable to punishment as the people who went inside. Because without him sitting there, they wouldn't have gone inside. They need a getaway car. He's part of the group that's performing the action. So here again, the fact that you're part of the group, if the group does something, that accrues to you, even though, in the case of the rock, they could have managed without you. It's the same principle. Here, it's not a question of the outcome. In the case of the rock, the outcome would have been exactly the same, and still, he's responsible for what he did. And similarly, if someone's getting a benefit, the person's responsible to bear his fair share. So now, having said all of that, where we end up with is, when you think about right and wrong, when you think about good and evil, there are really two things to think about: what happens to the world on the one hand, and what kinds of actions are performed on the other hand. What's the Torah system? How does the Torah look at these things? The Torah has in it rules, some rules that are built on utility. Do this because it's good for the community. Do this because it's good for your family or because it's good for yourself. Some rules are definitely built on the fact that you make the world a better place when you do it. Some rules don't look that way. Some rules look like, I want this to happen, and because I'm the creator, I have the authority to determine what should happen. And when you look at it, if you believe in the facts of the Torah, then the creator does have that authority, and you accept both. You accept the responsibility to make the world a better place, not to damage it, and you also accept the responsibility to run your life and run the world in a way that accords with the rules that Hashem put down for appropriate conduct. But in the end, I think that the Torah is a utilitarian system because God created the world to benefit his creatures. That's why he created it. He created it so things should be good for them, that they should achieve the greatest possible good for themselves possible, greatest possible good for themselves. So it works out like this. I look at the world with two eyes, utility and what's called deontology, rectitude, things that are right and wrong. And it's correct for me to do that. It's just that when I see something like killing someone to get his organs for somebody else, or pushing the fat man off the bridge, or sacrificing, when I see that and I say, no, you can't do that, I don't see the utility. I don't see the goodness at the end of the track. So I'm left with two points of view: doing things that will make the world better, and accepting rules that are absolute, which can't be justified by making the world better. But in the end, it's all one system, because in the end, it will make the world better. To not kill this guy and take his organs and let the other 5 die will make the world better. I just don't see that. I don't see how. What I see is one person lives and 5 people die. That doesn't look better to me. So the message here, I think, is a pretty subtle message. Use your thinking. Even though your thinking is partial, even though your thinking is incomplete, even though your thinking can't take into account the sum total of the world, can't take into account the far-range consequences, use your two-dimensional thinking. As a matter of fact, in the footnote it says, when you use your two-dimensional thinking, you will in fact, in the end, produce the best possible outcome. That's what will happen. But you can't look at it that way because you can't see the outcome. So this is a good example of how Kadosh Baruch Hu puts us in a world, and he gives us certain capabilities, and those capabilities are limited, certainly vis-a-vis his infinity, they're limited. And he tells us, use the capabilities that you have and operate with them, even though some of them don't take into account the ultimate reality, because that's the best you can do to get to the ultimate reality. And you'll get there, even without your understanding exactly how and why it works. It's a little bit like the way you would instruct a beginner how to use a complicated piece of technology. So when the red light is on, pull out the plug. just pull out the plug. Don't do anything else. Don't try to reprogram it. Don't try to fix it. Just pull out the plug. Why? I'm telling you. Pull out the plug. Either it'll explode, or there'll be $14 million worth of damage, or the police will shut down the whole laboratory. Just pull out the plug. So you do it, and that way you save the whole experiment, you save the whole system. And using our limited knowledge the way we do, that's something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. This is similar to what I said to you on a prior occasion, that Because we are given a picture of the way Kodesh Baruch Hu runs the world. He has a purpose for the creation. He invited us to participate in achieving the purpose, so we partners in the creation. That's very anthropomorphic. Doing something for a reason and having means chosen for the reason, and then consequences of being partners and so forth and so on. It's very anthropomorphic. It isn't a literally true ultimate description, but it's a description that the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants us to work with when we're living in His world and operating in His world. So what we're being told is this is an incomplete picture, but it's the right picture for you to use in dealing with what you're dealing. And that, I think, is typical. It's very much like a parent to a child when you instruct a child on how to handle the things that he's doing. And because of the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu interacts with us and with things that He does in history, we have direct experience of the fact that He has enormous power, an enormous understanding, and enormous control. So when He says, this is the way I want you to operate, but there's more than what you see, there's no reason to be doubtful about that. That's the kind of mental set that we have to have. I'll just put in one more word. That means that some of what we do is based on trust. You know perhaps the word emunah in Hebrew. It's translated in English as faith. I think that's an unfortunate translation. The word faith is really a Christian word, and in the Christian or post-Christian vocabulary, faith means something I believe or do without reason. Something I believe or do without reason. I don't think that has any place whatsoever in Jewish thinking. It's just that there are various types of reasons. Not all reasons come in the same size and shape. When I follow my instructions from my doctor, says I didn't spend 4 years in medical school, and I don't want to spend 4 years in medical school. I'm not interested in learning medicine. When he tells me to do it, I do it on the trust that he's trained and he understands, and it'll be good for me. So there's such a thing as rational trust. I trust, but the person's earned my trust. I think that's what emunah is. It's rational trust. So, but the trust is definitely there. From time to time, we're going to be asked to do things where we can't see the details of what's going on to make our own independent judgment that it's right. But that doesn't mean that we're doing it against reason. Reason tells us that from this source, you have credible information that's worthy of trust. That's also a reason to do it. Okay, that's the thing that I wanted to accomplish for today. Questions before we quit? No? Okay.